My main purpose in making these videos is information as a public service. I've long believed that my experience includes a call to public safety, and this is my contribution to public safety. That doesn't mean I don't think that I should be rewarded for my work. I do. But public safety comes first. I'm, in other words, not one of those people who's going to hoard information for public safety that's needed for public safety because I can make more money if people don't know about it and find out about it later than my exclusive publishing contract. However, those are the sorts who have been targeting me and threatening to shut me down by any means necessary. Because my objective is public service, not exclusively bound to contributions without reward. I believe that a writer should be paid for their work, and under no circumstances believe that I should be exploited this way. Part of the reason why I'm warning the public about what's happening is because of the way that I'm being exploited. This might seem very difficult for you to understand, but as an American principle, the right to compensation for labor and injury is the basis of human dignity, peace, civil liberty, and human rights. Civil rights, as we call them, the Bill of Rights. It's just common sense that you don't do injury and enslave somebody. However, I'm going to make a small concession to the fact that there's an audience that may include women. By organizing this in the awkward address of them personally, because it's difficult to reorganize important ideas around a less general audience and focus on a more specific audience, not to exclude anybody, not to suggest that men listening to my views are eavesdropping, but in order to put into context some of the issues that arise from my concerns in specific answer to relatively ponderous ideas that have been put forward in my direction by women that I don't really understand how to address, so I'm going to try to learn from the effort. I personally believed for a long time, I know who visited the terrible crime I live with on me, and the terrible crime that I testified to on me, were the Bush science fiction Red Scare generation of cinema. And I thought when I saw the magnitude of the problem that they were loping in with, that their terrible, terrifying extremism would discredit them. I thought that when it became clear that the fundamentalists had formed an iron axis and released aids, that it would discredit them. But the British were expert at populism, and they sent warriors of the mysticism of Gurdjieff to trot to the advocacy for Colin Powell after Mount Desert Island. And they created a climate of humiliation surrounding yours truly. I'd like to address the climate of humiliation. It's a problem that exists in the black community when a black person is singled out the way Trayvon Martin was, and crime is successfully executed against that person by self-appointed vigilantes, as it seemed to me. The black community learned the lesson. The black community learned the lesson very well. They don't wait to find out if the person deserved to be humiliated, because they that can see that the humiliation that's being visited on the person is preemptive humiliation. It's part of a legacy of humiliation. It's an attempt to extend scorn for black people. Well, I realize that nobody can say that we're going to defend a white boy against humiliation, but it wasn't that I was white that these people were mongering. It was that I was being used and passed around by girls who dismissed me as an inadequate person because I'm deaf. One of these women around town has called me arrogant. That's what made me want to address this for women. You see, it would take a very discursive and inactive deaf sociologists and psychologists to explain what happens to deaf people who have been extremely severely humiliated is that we become an introvert. We back off. We restrain our temper because we understand that we have difficulty integrating. I restrained my temper because I did actually fall in love with a woman. And I didn't want to make her rejection of me a point of contest because I felt that it had more grace and magnanimity just to let go. And that was one of the ways that the perverts who tortured me barricaded me inside the perception that I had it coming. There's no society as evil and poisonous and cruel as Seattle, Washington, this side of Nazi Germany. What they've done to me is absolutely sickening. They poison me in such a way that I get sounds in my ears. They poison me in such a way that I have Parkinson's disease. And they did so to challenge the idea that I was warning people to prevent them from being overloaded. The AIDS attack was something that they wanted to see spread because it gave collective consciousness to a collective power structure that they were building of making people codependent by injury because they don't like independence. They seethe with hostility at the idea of independence. You should see them ravaging the carpets at the idea that a poet's book would be published to improve the living standard of the poet who worked so hard among them as a volunteer to get inspiration. And then they claim that they wrote the poems. They wrote the poems. See, because they're ventriloquists. They made the experience, they made the adventures, they summoned Hollywood. And they dare to say that I was not trying to prevent them from being overloaded while they do everything in their strangle grip that they can think of to overload me. And if they had listened, we might have gotten abreast. If March Peckman, who said they have trouble establishing jurisdiction, just let me stop for a second and talk about the trouble they have establishing jurisdiction. It speaks to an anarchy in law enforcement as a philosophy of our society that I do not understand. What does my arrogance have to do with the idea of objective examination of crime? It doesn't make that much sense. The arrogance has nothing to do with it. It's an anarchy in our society. It's an anarchy in our law enforcement society. That's what I'm trying to make clear. All I did was ask somebody to look at detective work, and I was arrested for it. That is criminally insane. It's a dissociative, dysfunctional, disaggregated concept of American culture that has no respect whatsoever for the idea that there even can be legitimate establishment of jurisdiction. And it was the federal law school, the federal law building, a magistrate of the U.S. government who told me that they would not be able to establish jurisdiction. if they had expressed concern to the FBI, to the police, to the administrators of school about what had happened, instead of listening to the sly and rude whispers of Bill Gates and Microsoft, of museum thieves like John Schulman, who they must have already known was ripping off the museum, one of the people who pigeonholed me, which was their word, as somebody who was deserved to be a rejected lover. And Seattle answered, my rejection is a lover, my introversion is a deaf man, as though my being a slave was such a laugh that they chemically castrated me. Forgive me. But the real reason women don't want anything to do with me, no slur against women intended, is prudence and practical. I can't get it up, I don't have any money, and people don't respect me. Don't make up stories about my arrogance to cover for your own sense of right and wrong. It's not wrong. That's my whole point. And I would say, I understand why you reject me. Deaf men are inadequate. We don't have the respect that we're due, and women have to have somebody around them who's respected. But Seattle, Washington answered this condition of me as a slave by giving me a paralysis condition, by sexually abominating my condition of personal health. They castrated me. It's criminally insane. Nothing this side of Nazi Germany has ever been so poisonous. Now, don't blame my arrogance for any of that. So, what we see is a deviant effort to subvert law enforcement by creating codependency as an organizing principle for political action. And because I didn't know what was going on, the dupe is blamed, and that seals the heights for the museum thieves. So let's talk a little bit about what's really important here, which is little beyond this legacy expulsion, because they did this to me because I was a symbol of America's victory at sea in World War II. And when I say that people should have understood the climate of humiliation and stood up for me, it's because they should have. As a legacy, it's not favoritism. It's not favoritism to defend Trayvon Martin. It's favoritism to appoint people who are children of an elite. But when there's an attack on a complete legacy that involves humiliating a person because of their class, it's an act of war. You read about this in Paris during the occupation. I read today of a man who said, as a man of Paris who grew up in Paris, I fear constantly that Germans will target me and humiliate me to humiliate Paris through me. That was what was going on. It was a legacy expulsion. It was a targecy for a legacy. It's like saying it's favoritism to defend Trayvon Martin. It's not. It's not promoting favoritism to recognize targeting based on a class of people, on a personal symbolism that has nothing to do with who you are personally. These people can't get it through their heads that a human being was at stake when they tortured me. They couldn't get it through their heads that I was telling the truth about what was being done to me and who had attacked me and why. They can't get any of that through their heads. And as a result, they overloaded themselves because their refusal to mourn the AIDS attack and act on the information I brought forward, so shrugging it off like Atlas shrugged with words from the U.S. government judge who said they were unable to establish jurisdiction, overloaded them when the same people again attacked us with COVID-19. This is not me overloading them. This is me shouldering a burden to communicate what happened that they refuse, absolutely refuse to understand or comprehend, because in their spinner beanies, they see me as a class of people who deserve to be tortured. And they sign on board with Tojo Ronin from World War II with the German Green Party, which is a convenient mask of Hitler's Germany from World War II, and say it's racial revenge? What does attacking somebody who has always tried to help black people have to do with racial revenge? It's not what they're making it out to be. It's an obscenity from the spinner beanie class of VW Dialectical. It's Seattle, Washington, who hacked together a fabrication and figured out how to make it spin. Now, when I say that this is all in discussion with women, I'm reaching the point of talking about what really matters, which is Gurdjieff's role in the Houdini of John Lennon. Gurdjieff, they like to say, we will never ever know because he was so secretive. But there's enough information that shows that he knew Joseph Stalin. He knew D'Annunzio, the first of the personality cults that led to the rise of the great dictators, and that Adolf Hitler was studying at one of his schools in secret. And this was a force like Errol Flynn, who was rumored to be meeting with Hitler, that put together, you might have thought that when Robert Fripp came wiggling, he was in cultural, a cosmopolitan anthropologist talking about Gurdjieff, setting up little schools to lure people like me as his victims to come and check them out. Because Diaghilev worked with Ouspensky, and Prokofiev and Picasso worked with Ouspensky, who was a student of Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff lived in the occupation of Paris, throughout Nazi Germany's occupation of Paris, and survived. Many of the things that he did, there are no record of and are unknown. Gurdjieff was somebody who was around a long time. He was back in the days of Diaghilev and Prokofiev and D'Annunzio, in the days when D.W. Griffith was making films like Birth of a Nation. That's when Gurdjieff got off the ground. So when the Wiggler Fripp came prancing with Gurdjieff, he was talking about something that had been invisible to us, like Errol Flynn living in the Laurel Canyon where Houdini was, invisible to us like Houdini. The mysticism of the Thule Society. Anybody who takes seriously looking into the rise of Nazi Germany and who financed Hitler finds the Mysterians of the Thule Society. Now that they say they outcast Gurdjieff as a Freemason, it's hardly likely. He was used by the extremists of the Italian futurists in cinema. His ideas of mysticism played into the way that they organized the Houdini of Lenin and a pornographic genocide that to this hour they still scorn as justified because of wayward sex. I wonder how and when these extremists from the sci-fi Red Scare of George Bush will finally abominate enough of these women who themselves were instigators of passing me around, enough that they can see that a child was being targeted to be humiliated by our most pernicious of enemies.